It's a big club, and you ain't in it. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. They want obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. At all.
Now let's take this information that we just gathered and let's apply it to historical facts, and let's see if we can find any evidence of Jewish royal cults in ancient Egypt. We're going to start off in ancient Egypt's Old Kingdom. There's a lot of history before this time in Egypt, and we're going to look at that history later when we seek to find out exactly where this royal cult came from. For now, we are just looking for evidence that this royal cult even existed. And as you will see, there is a ton of evidence indicating that there is a Semitic-speaking, moon-worshipping royal cult that ruled the world during ancient Egypt and very likely still rules the world till today, and also very likely ruled the world even before ancient Egypt. So we're going to start in ancient Egypt's Old Kingdom, and that is basically the first kingdom, or basically the first unified period of ancient Egypt. And ancient Egypt's Old Kingdom begins in the 3rd dynasty. As you see here in Wikipedia, the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom. It says, the first pharaoh of the Old Kingdom was Djoser, sometime between 2691 and 2625, who ordered the construction of a pyramid, the Step Pyramid. And it says here, an important person during the reign of Djoser was his viceroy, Amenhotep. So let's look into Amenhotep. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. It's Imhotep, as in the Imhotep from the Mummy movie, with Brendan Fraser, and they're all like, Imhotep, Imhotep. Yeah, he's the bad guy in that movie. So let's see what Wikipedia says about Imhotep. So it says that Imhotep, his hieroglyph, stands for the one who comes in peace. That's right, they were using propaganda to mislead people back then too. This guy did not come in peace. So he was an Egyptian chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser, and he's the probable architect of the Step Pyramid, and he was a high priest of the sun god Ra. See, I'm going to take a pause here for a second. This is actually what confuses a lot of people. Even till today, when I got into the conspiracy realm, there was a lot of people who were saying that these people worship the sun, that they were sun worshippers. And here, it says that Imhotep was a high priest of the sun god Ra, and the sun god was a very important god in ancient Egypt. But as you will see, this is a ruse. These guys actually don't worship the sun. But let me hold there. Let's go into a little bit more of Imhotep. And for the sake of brevity, for the sake of this video not being like 8 hours long, I'm going to try to stick to reading the stuff that I've highlighted. So he was a high priest of the sun god Ra. And then later on in his Wikipedia, in his mythification part, it says, 2,000 years after his death, Imhotep's statues had risen to that of a god of medicine and healing. He was eventually equated with Thoth, the god of architecture, mathematics, medicine, and patron of the scribes. Let's look at this guy Thoth, this god Thoth that he was eventually equated with. See, it left some stuff out of what this god Thoth really represents. So here it says architect, mathematics, medicine, and patron of the scribes. See, but when we go and we look at Thoth, it actually tells us one more thing about him. So god of knowledge and the moon. Okay, Wikipedia Thoth, he's associated with the moon. So it's incredible, as you see here, he's not associated with the sun, but he is associated with wisdom, intelligence, and most importantly, I really want to highlight the moon. So I want to know how the high priest of the sun ended up becoming associated with a moon god. And we're going to find out very shortly why he's associated with the moon. We're going to find out why they actually worship the moon. But for now, I just want to point out that this Thoth, Imhotep being associated with Thoth, you find Thoth in a lot of hieroglyphs. For instance, this hieroglyph, where he's standing next to another moon god, Isis. And we're going to find that out in a second. Yes, that's right. The crown of the central figure here, which I believe is Isis, if I'm not mistaken, that crown of hers is actually a moon symbol, and it's actually a symbol of the full moon sitting inside the crescent moon. And this is also, as you shall see, where the devil got his horns, when they separated those two symbols. So going back to the mythification of Imhotep, he was revered in the region of Thebes as the, quote, brother of Amenhotep, son of Hapu, another deified architect. So I find this interesting that they deified architects. See, I believe that the architects, they were deified because it was the architects who were responsible for increasing the power of the pharaoh. By building these very elaborate pyramids, by building these things, they were allowed to raise the pharaohs closer to God and make the pharaohs seem even more divine. And of course, I don't think that this is the only purpose of the pyramids. I just think that it was a key purpose of the pyramids. Imhotep was also linked to this name that I cannot pronounce by the Greeks, this other god by the Greeks. And there's some interesting stuff about this god. So I'm going to just point out some of the stuff that's on the front here. He's pretty much associated with all of the things that Thoth is associated with. But he's also, he's a healer. He was one of Apollo's sons, one of the sun's sons, sharing with Apollo the epithet Pian, the healer, the rod of Asclepius, or I can't pronounce that. A snake-entwined staff remains a symbol of medicine today. So that's interesting that he's associated with snakes here, and essentially the medicine. But the very interesting thing is what can be found in his etymology, and that is that they don't know where the word actually comes from. They have no idea what the etymology of this Greek word is. However, some believe that it may refer to a mole, like a mole, and I see this as like an implant. Like, oh, we have a mole in our agency. So I find that very interesting, very revealing. Maybe somewhere along the lines, or maybe they just wanted to put it right in front of people, that this guy is actually a mole. Another thing that I want to note about Thoth is that he is a god of reading, hieroglyphs, magic, secrets, scribes, and writing. To me, I think that those things can be grouped together, and we can say that he is a god of propaganda. But let's not linger here, we have much to cover. According to myth, Imhotep's mother was a mortal named whatever, her too being eventually revered as a demigoddess, as daughter of whatever. Alternatively, since Imhotep was known as the son of Ptah, his mother was sometimes claimed to be a Sekhmet, the patron of Upper Egypt, whose consort was Ptah. So essentially what it's saying here is that this guy is basically another Jesus figure. It's claiming that his mother mortal, but she had a child with a god. And then of course she was eventually moved up to a demigoddess status, just like the Virgin Mary has been. And when you look at the Wikipedia of Ptah, he looks like this. He is the god of creation, just like Jesus' father, the supposed one true God. He's the one who created the universe. He's also a god of the arts, fertility, and of craftsmanship, or of craftsmen. Sort of linked to architecture still. And this is of course linked to Jesus as well, in that he was a carpenter. For now, let's go back to the Third Dynasty. Let's wrap up the Third Dynasty. I want to go through this very quick, okay? If you guys want to go back and check this work yourself, you can, but I'm not going to go through every little word. There's a ton of information, as you will see, that I have to cover here. About 150,000 years worth. I could go back a million years, but I'm going to try to stick in the 150,000 years range. So, back to the Third Dynasty. It was in this era that formerly independent ancient Egyptian states became known as nomes under the rule of the pharaoh. The former rulers were forced to assume the role of governors or otherwise work in tax collection. Egyptians in this era worshipped their pharaoh as a god, believing that he ensured the annual flooding of the Nile that was necessary for their crops. And later on, when we look to see where these people actually came from, precisely how they seated themselves in Egypt, we're going to see exactly why people perceive them as special and why they tied the annual flooding to the Nile with this group of people, with this group of elites. For now, let's just go into the 4th dynasty. So there are 3 things that I want to note about this time period, and one of those things has like a little bracket. So 3.5 things I want to note about this time period. 1, there was a ton of construction going on during this time period, during the 4th dynasty, including the construction of the Great Pyramid and the construction of the Sphinx, and many lesser known pyramids and megalithic structures. The second thing that I want to note about this time period is that the rulers in this time period are all related. Okay, they're all related, and they're related to the rulers of the 3rd dynasty. And the rulers of the 3rd dynasty are also related to one of the last rulers in the pre-dynastic period, which is the period before the 3rd dynasty. The third thing that I want to note about this time period is that there were military expeditions into Canaan and Nubia, with Egyptian influence reaching up the Nile into what is today the Sudan. So I needed just the bracket about this point is that Canaan is basically Israel. Okay, Nubia is further south, so they went south and north. But the military expeditions into Canaan, I don't think that they were to conquer the Israelis in Canaan or the Jews in Canaan. I think it was actually to reinforce that position. And I believe that they went to Canaan to reinforce it, or possibly to stop an uprising there, because as you will see later, it is most likely that this is where the elite came from. But more on that later. For now, let's move into the 5th dynasty. And there are a couple interesting things to note about the 5th dynasty. One of them is that it was marked by a growing importance of the cult of sun god Ra, and consequently, fewer efforts were devoted to the construction of pyramid complexes than during the 4th dynasty, and more construction was focused on building sun temples. I believe that the reason why they reduced pyramid constructions and increased the amount of sun temples that they were building was because they were losing the respect of the people. And there is evidence for this, and I will introduce that evidence in a second. Let me just continue with my theory. So, pyramids take a lot of effort to build, a lot of people to build, a lot of manpower to build, and it redirects a lot of resources. So, of course, after a dynasty, after the 4th dynasty, of an intense amount of pyramid building, people are really going to start not liking their ruler. They're going to really start questioning their ruler. So I believe that they stopped building pyramids, which was a source of their power, and they started to focus on building sun temples. And they started building sun temples because sun temples, or the sun god, was another source of their power. And sun temples are relatively easy to build. However, they were not actual worshippers of the sun. I believe that the worship of the sun was a public thing. It was not a thing that the royals actually did. The royal cult, I believe, was a moon cult, and I will provide evidence for that momentarily. Let me now introduce the evidence that reinforces my belief that the pharaohs at this time were losing the respect of the people. One point of evidence is the short length of this dynasty. This dynasty did not last very long. And you'll see what happens in the next dynasty. You'll see that in the next dynasty, the pharaohs actually fall out of power. So the 5th dynasty is actually the decline of the pharaoh's power. And you see the decline of the pharaoh's power in the fact that there was a lot of rulers. There was a quick succession of rulers, as you see here. It was this person and that person, but at the same time, it was all keeping it in the family. So I think that this change of rulers, it wasn't an actual inner struggle. They were just trying to change stuff up. They were trying to confuse the people and change who the ruler was so that they can redirect the negative attitude towards the previous ruler and not on the current ruler. Now, before we move on to the 6th dynasty, I'm going to explain why I believe that the royal cult that was influencing the pharaoh was a moon cult and not a sun cult. And in order to do this, we're going to have to take a closer look at the Egyptian gods and goddesses. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the gods and goddesses associated with the pharaoh, ancient Egypt's most popular gods and goddesses. So the god who was said to be the ruler over the whole of Egypt was Horus, and the pharaoh was seen as an incarnation or as a descendant of Horus. However, from the 2nd dynasty onward, the pharaoh derived his power from the sun god Re, who by then was the preeminent creator god. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Horus, and see if Horus was a moon or a sun god. But before we do that, I just want you all to take note that this falcon statue, or this hawk statue with this weird hat on it, That hat looks suspiciously a lot like the Pope's crown and the Pope's hat. But that's just a minor digression. The question at hand is, who was Horus? What did Horus represent? Now, if you Wikipedia Horus, you're going to find a lot of confusing information, and this is the case with a lot of these gods. I had to do a fair amount of research in order to discover that these gods are actually moon gods, and that the sun god part of them is just a distraction. It's just window dressing. I even had to go and double check, and I Googled, I said, because I determined that Isis was a moon god, but yet she's also associated with the sun in a lot of cases. So I actually had to go back and type in, is Isis a moon goddess? And of course I came up with this, and it said, modern pagans often think of Isis as a moon goddess. To the Greeks, goddesses were the lunar deities. So as Isis made her way into Greek culture and hearts, her new devotees naturally associated her with the moon. In Egypt, Osiris, Khans, Thoth, and Ea, or Aya, were the deities most associated with the moon. And if you look at this image that they have here of Isis, it's actually rather revealing. It has that full moon sitting inside the crescent moon that I briefly talked about before that was in the other images of Isis. I like that it has that here because if you look at a lot of places, it says that full moon, oh, that's not the full moon, that's the sun. Well, those people don't know what the talking about. Although I will acknowledge that it makes some sense, because the pharaohs of Egypt, they had a double crown, and the crown was supposed to show that they ruled Upper and Lower Egypt. And it could be that double crown came from this image of Isis, and it could be that double crown is just showing that the person rules both the sun and the moon. That's a possibility, but I don't think it's the case. And here are a couple of reasons why I think this. Well, one is this hieroglyph right here. In this hieroglyph, you see Thoth to the far left, and look at that. Thoth has that same crescent crown with that object in the center of it, which is either the sun or the moon, but we know Thoth is a moon god, so he has that moon crown that refers to the crescent moon and the full moon. And of course, right next to him to the right is Isis. There are other things that support my idea that this crown is referring to the different phases of the moon, the full moon and the crescent moon, which was actually considered a work of magic at that time. But I don't want to linger here. I will show this image here. This was one of the few images that I came across in Google Images that actually had this correctly titled, and as you see here, it was titled Isis with Moon and Lunar Horns Nursing Horus. So going back to Horus, and I'm going to try to make this quick because there's a lot of information to cover. I don't want to linger here. If you guys don't believe me, you guys can go check this information out and provide a counter-argument. I would love to hear your counter-argument, and I would love to provide a counter-argument to your counter-argument because I know I'm capable of doing so. So even in the mythology of Horus, his left eye is considered the moon. And this is very interesting because in the Muslim world, the left side is considered the satanic side, and this is going to come out later in a moment, because Satan is related to the moon, and Satan actually got his horns from the crescent moon symbol. So let me just break this down for you in a second. So let's just get it out of the way, and hopefully you guys accept that these are all moon deities. These are all moon deities that have a slight sun deity twist in them, but that sun deity twist in them is only a cover. It's just a show. Okay, I'm going to explain why they worship the moon in a second. It says here that since Horus is a sky god, he was considered to also contain the sun and the moon. Okay, so here it's basically letting us know that sky gods contain the sun and the moon. I think the most important part of that is the moon. So, anyway, oh yeah, Isis. Yeah, she was the first daughter of Jeb, god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. And Jeb and Nut, we're going to see them again later on in this documentary, in a story that is basically a perfect allegory of what is happening. We're going to see that later. Don't fixate too much on my words. Oh yeah, I wanted to point out something about Horus's father, Osiris. So, Osiris is depicted in green. Here's a picture of him right here. Now, people, they said that this green, his green skin, symbolizes rebirth and resurrection. Really? These Egyptologists want you to believe that his green skin symbolizes rebirth and resurrection. I call bull. You know why? There's another god that has green skin. And what god is that, you might ask? Well, just guess. If you guessed a moon god, then yeah, you're right. So, Khonsu, or however you pronounce this guy's way, maybe it's Honsu, maybe the K is silent, is god of the moon. And would you look at that? The god of the moon has green skin like Osiris and is wearing this crescent crown with a full moon like Isis. Huh. Coincidence? I think not. There's another little bit of symbolism that's very important to note here, and that is, I'll show you first on Osiris. Let's look back at Osiris. He has the flail, or the whip, and the staff there. We're going to see that later on, okay? So guess who else has that? Oh, look at that. The god of the moon has that on his staff. How interesting. Coincidence? I think not. And now I'm going to make a rather profound assertion. And I sort of made this assertion before when I talked about how Thoth seemed to have a lot of parallels with Jesus. Well, guess what? Not only does Thotham have some parallels with Jesus, so does Horus. So if you look in the Wikipedia of Isis, you find this. The popular motif of Isis suckling her son Horus, however, lived on in a Christianized context as the popular image of Mary suckling her infant son Jesus from the 5th century onward. And while we're looking at this picture of Mary of suckling Jesus, let's keep in mind that little halo around her head, and realize that that halo is another moon symbol. And it should also be noted that Isis is the patroness of nature and magic. And this is something a lot of people don't know. The moon is actually associated with magic because it was one of the most magical objects in the sky at the time. It was one of the objects that underwent the most amount of change as it went through its different phases. And also, I'm pretty confident that they were aware, and I know some people will disagree with this because some people think that the moon doesn't get its light from the sun now, but I'm pretty sure that some people were aware at that time that the moon stole its light from the sun. So I'm pretty sure that they were aware that the moon was like a mirror, and mirrors are used in magic. But that's a digression. Let's continue on, and I just want to make a quick point, and that is, you'll find in Horus that another tradition of him, it regards Hathor as his mother and sometimes his wife. Hathor is just Isis. Okay, these people, they change stuff around a lot, and the Egyptologists, they have this to say. The ancient Egyptians viewed reality as multi-layered, in which deities who merged for various reasons, while retaining divergent attributes and myths, were not seen as contradictory, but complementary. I don't think that they could know this. I don't think that Egyptologists can actually know that ancient Egyptians felt this way. However, I'm sure the hieroglyphs would indicate this, but that doesn't mean the ancient Egyptians felt this way. It just meant that this is what the pharaonic order and the elite were trying to do to people. You know, just like a person whose lying story always changes, they can't keep a story straight. So, one elite person was saying this, and then another elite person was saying that, and then they tried saying, oh, no, they're the same story, we can put them together, it makes sense. It's just liars. This is the characteristic of liars. This is how you know that there's a lot of lying going around, a lot of deception. And what I think happened, and this is actually why I believe that they went from sun worship, worshiping the sun and the moon, to sun worship, like worshiping the son of a divine figure. I think it was to create confusion. They wanted to further bury what they were really about. They were probably being cocky, and they were trying to put themselves out there just like they do now. I've decided to correct what I said here in editing. I don't think that their actions are out of being cocky. I don't think that's what it is. I think that their actions are out of the fact that they're really dumb. They actually believe the lies that they've told people. And it reminds me a lot of this Futurama episode, Fear of a Bot Planet, from Season 1. I believe it was Season 1, Episode 6. Fry, Leela, and Bender end up on a robot planet, and this robot planet is just full of propaganda. They show propaganda in the movie theaters, they show propaganda everywhere, and everyone is convinced by this propaganda that humans are something to fear. And not only are the common robots convinced that humans are something to fear, but near the end, Fry uses the robot propaganda to escape the robot elders. He tells them that he'll breathe fire on them. And not only do the robots have to debate whether or not Fry can breathe fire on them, but they also believe the propaganda surrounding Bender, that Bender is a great human slayer. Here's the part of that episode I'm talking about. And as you can see, there's a couple of other truth gems in that episode. I recommend that everyone seek out that episode and watch it, and pay especially close attention to the end when Fry and Leela celebrate Robot Hanukkah for Bender. And the reason why I believe that the elite are just really stupid and have fallen for their propaganda is because of all the satanic rituals that they've been busted in, and all of the satanic rituals that they continue to do in the public eye. To me, this says that they actually believe this hocus pocus that they try to sell to people. This idea that there's a spiritual realm paying us any real attention. Or maybe it is possible that they're actually very smart, and all of these rituals are just their way of solidifying this propaganda in the minds of the masses. But I digress. That is a topic for another video. And then they realize, like, oh shit, we have to mix stuff up now because they're catching on to what we really believe. They're catching on to our deception. So they had to go into a deeper layer of their deception. It's a lot like that movie Inception. It was to hide that they were worshipping the moon, and specifically why they're worshipping the moon. And here you actually have an image. This is Sumerian god. Well, this is a Sumerian king right here, or Sumerian god. And this is a really common image. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this image. And it's this wheel in front of this god. And a lot of people, they've said that this is a sun disk in front of him. It's not. It's the moon, actually. And I know it's the moon because if you look on the wall behind the big guy, you have the different phases of the moon right there. You have that crescent moon, you can barely see it. And then you have like another moon. I don't know what phase of the moon that is. Maybe it's showing the moon when it's totally naked, and then when it's totally lit up. But that's what's happening here. There's actually a moon symbol, and you see this moon symbol in this Baphomet also. Baphomet is of course a more well-known moon deity, and this is essentially what I think we're looking at in the Sumerian hieroglyph. If you look at this Baphomet image, you see the star within the circle. That's a moon image, okay? And it's almost identical to this wheel that's in front of this big guy. It's a star inside of a moon symbol. I don't think it was, I think this was them trying to convince the people that the moon had its own light, which, was trying to deter them from the magic of the moon. You see the moon symbol living on in the Islamic world for whatever reason, and that devil horn hand sign is a hand sign of the moon. So when the elite are doing that hand sign, it's not letting people know that they're satanic or maybe, on a superficial level, it's really showing the knowledge of the moon. It's the crescent horn, okay? And that shows that, they're part of that club. They're part of that elite group that can wear the crescent crown. Okay, this is an image of Eminem doing it, okay? And here's an image of the devil with his horns, or a demon with his horns. That, I believe, came when they separated the two. I believe that they put the full moon in Christ, and then they put the crescent moon in the demon world. And in this way, both heaven and hell, it's like as above, so below. They're actually both, right now, Satan, or this moon cult, rules both heaven and hell. They rule every facet of the religious world. And I even believe that the title Christ, because Christ is actually a title, I believe that the title Christ comes from the word crescent. Okay, so here's some more things. As I said before, here's a picture of Christ with the moon or his halo behind him. That's clearly the moon. And in this image, it's really apparent because it seems like there's sunset. It sort of looks like the light is further down. Okay, and another thing, I mean, Christ was born at nighttime. Okay, he was born at nighttime at the time of the year where it's the darkest. In December, it's the darkest. And some people will say, oh, well, he's born on the third day that the sun begins to go higher in the sky. Don't give me that crap, okay? Don't give me that technical crap of like, oh, well, technically it's the third day that the sun is beginning its journey upwards, so it's like the birth of Christ. No, it's not, okay? He's a moon deity. His time of being born in December, which is supposedly not an accurate time. Other people say that, oh, he must have been born in March. They're just trying to add to the deception, okay? Just stick to the tradition. Contradict the tradition. Don't try to have other people try to reinterpret the tradition to muddy the water. And that's exactly what it is. It's muddying the waters. Don't accuse me of being counterfactual. Don't accuse me of denying facts that people try to bring it to the table. They're not facts, first of all, okay? I've already proven that the story of Christ is a reinterpretation of the story of Horus and Imhotep, okay? Both of which are moon figures, okay? Imhotep associated with Thoth, the god of the moon. Horus, another moon deity, son. He's a son of a moon deity. So even the Virgin Mary would be considered a moon deity in this case. So please, don't try to argue with what I'm saying here. I've done the research. I'm sure you haven't even given it 5 minutes thought. I'm sure you've just listened to what other people say. People who you think are smarter than you, but they're not smarter than you. They're just smarter than you in the fact that they're willing to deceive you. They're more calculated than you. That's about it. Okay. Now, the question that I have to answer before we move on, I almost moved on without making my point. Silly me. Now, why are they trying to muddy the water? Well, to cover up the real reason why they're worshipping the moon. Why are they worshipping the moon? I'm going to tell you right now. And it's going to tie everything, well, not everything, but it's going to tie the stuff that we just covered in the last 5 minutes together. So as was said earlier, the pharaohs were given their power, or Horus was given his power by the sun god Re. So the pharaohs were given their power by the sun god Re. Well, in this case, the pharaohs are precisely like the moon. The moon gets its power, its light, from the sun. And I'm pretty confident that they had some knowledge of this. So I believe they worshipped the moon, or they were a moon cult, because they saw themselves as the moon. And it's funny, well, it's not funny, it's actually very sad, but it's funny how this is actually exactly what happens today with Satan. Okay, Satan is a moon figure, so if they are worshipping Satan and not worshipping the moon, if they're not aware of the connection, they worship Satan because they see themselves as Satan. Okay, Paradise Lost, for those who aren't familiar with it, made Satan seem like he wasn't doing anything wrong. It made Satan seem like he was actually a very reasonable person. I had an English professor who loved Paradise Lost. Okay, these people, they see themselves as the devil. They actually think that pride is good. They think that having this ownership of themselves, well, not this ownership of themselves, ownership of yourself is good, okay? But they see that acting outside of God's kingdom is a good thing. Rebelling against God, rebelling against the laws of nature, they see as a good thing. They're all about being liberated. And I sort of speak about being liberated here in a negative sense because they don't want to be liberated in the sense that we're familiar with, like liberated from government, liberated from enslavement of our fellow man. They want to be liberated from God so that they can establish their own kingdom, so they can do to others what they accuse God of doing to the devil. See, there's a lot of confusion here, and it's going to take a lot more videos for me to flush out all of this indoctrination, all of these false ideas that blind the eyes of all parties involved.